All right, the Mets' first half has come to a close. We'll discuss that. But first, we have Joe DeMayo on with us, SNY contributor to the Mets Perspective and co-host of that show on SNY.TV to talk about Kumar Rocker. The Mets had their choices of picks in the first round. They chose someone who you probably had heard of. That's interesting. We'll talk about it right now. Welcome to the Shea Anything podcast. Doug Williams and Andy Martino with you with special guest Joe DeMayo. We'll get underway in just a second. A reminder to subscribe, rate, and review to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We appreciate it. And Shea Anything's brought to you by Verizon. It's 5G built right for the Mets from the network more people rely on only on Verizon. So I gave Joe's credentials earlier. Joe, we're happy to have you. I know yesterday was a busy day for you. How prepared were you for the Mets to get Kumar Rocker yesterday?
Not really. So I actually had like 6 tweets drafted for players that the Mets could pick, so I could just pop that tweet off really quick. And Kumar Rocker was not one of them. I had heard through the grapevine throughout the last couple months that he was going to fall out of the top 5, partially and due to some inconsistencies with his velocity throughout the spring. He'd have some starts where he was 90 to 92, and then he'd have starts where he's 94 to 96, touching 98. So between that and then also signing bonus demands, I don't know he's going to be quite as friendly as some prospects are willing to up top. So I wasn't really prepared per se, but I knew that if he got past Kansas City at 7, there was a very real chance he was going to be there at 10. And if the Mets didn't take him at 10, RIP to my Twitter mentions, because I have never had a draft prospect that fans wanted so badly that I would get tweets randomly, 12 p.m. on a Wednesday. Hey, is Kumar Rocker going to be there at 10? Like, this is the guy the Mets wanted, and he was obviously certainly very worth the pick.
Andy, I was telling Joe before we started taping that you and I just happened to be talking last week about college baseball, and you were telling me to watch it more often. And I didn't realize how much college baseball you'd watched this year. So you've watched Rocker pitch just as a viewer, but I know you've also done some research on him since the Mets made the pick.
Well, yeah, it was interesting to me. I mean, Joe mentions the reason why he fell so far from being a possible 1-1, signability concerns combined with the velocity stuff. And what I saw towards the end of the College World Series was certainly not a guy who, like some Mets fans hope, would step right into the big leagues like one of those college pitchers and, contribute this year, with one exception being that, like, some of these cutting edge teams like the Tampa Bay Rays that come out and have relievers throw one pitch, Rocker has a big league slider, obviously. Right now, I say obviously, if you've seen that slider, I say obviously to Joe, who's seen it, I'm sure video of it a million times. I don't know if you've seen him in person, Joe, but I'm sure you've seen reams of video. Sure. You could come out and spin 15 of those sliders in a row like the Rays do and get some big league hitters out. But overall, with the fastball velocity and command and actually spin, if you look under the hood, not close, not there. And the reviews are mixed. Like, one guy was just telling me, I was late to this because I was texting with someone who's seen a lot of them. It's just saying he's weird. Some days he looks like the number 1 guy in the draft and just not consistent enough to be in that category. Mets people I've talked to this morning are like, velo dips are part of player development. Normally they're not as scrutinized. You see them. That was my question. Like, do you expect to see this through the minor leagues on a guy like this? And we just don't know it. And in fairness, yeah, probably. But, like someone who's seen Vandy a lot was just telling me his velocity is not what people make it sound like. He will touch mid to upper 90s, but generally pitch 91, 94. His slider is very effective. But the questions about his fastball are valid. He will have to adjust to the increase in usage on the pro side, so I doubt there will be a natural uptick in velo. I'm still reading from what someone who's seen him a lot texted me. He needs to continue to grow. It's not a finished product. You don't need it to be a finished product. You just drafted him. But I think that Mets fans should realize that just because he's a big name, unless you want him to come and throw only sliders, he's probably not ready.
There's
Joe,
still
you think that's
work,
fair assessment?
Still work to do, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely a fair assessment. And I think a part of the issue too was preseason, everyone had him as the consensus number 1 pick. He was getting compared to Steven Strasburg, who obviously had his share of injury issues, but when Strasburg is healthy, he's obviously one of the best pitchers in baseball. So everyone saw that and just assumed the Mets got, a Steven Strasburg type of guy. And I think throughout the spring, he proved that Simply, it was maybe just a little overhyped preseason. And sometimes the media takes time to catch up to really what the scouting community and people that see them in person actually, see. Like I had Rocker on my big board outside of the top 5 players. I have number 6 overall on my big board. So certainly a value pick, but I don't know necessarily that they got that slam dunk ace guy. But to Andy's point, if he's able to put this stuff together, then of course, I mean, the stuff is fantastic. And he has number 2 starter upside if everything comes together. I'm very interested to see have him go down to St. Lucie, work with some of the analytics staff, some of the player development. I know they're working on developing a pitching lab down there. So it's really going to be like an analytics hotbed of sorts for pitching. So I'd like to see him get under the eyes of those men and women and see kind of how they could develop, like Andy said, the spin rate on his fastball and, really kind of help him along, because he's not a finished product, but what you have is certainly a quality prospect.
And another interesting point, someone with the Mets was saying, like, you comparing him to Jack Leiter, who you just happen to have 2 recognizable names in this year's draft from the same program. And Leiter, obviously, because of his dad, and Rocker, because I think the name Kumar Rocker kind of jumps out, and that helps his celebrity status. First of all, you sort of think about John Rocker, but then his first name is Kumar, and then he's this big, huge dude. There's just a lot of interesting things going on before you even see him throw a pitch there. But like Jack Leiter, the point that was made to me, Jack Leiter looks like a teenager still. Yeah. It's like his face and his build and everything. And Kumar Rocker looks like Levon Hernandez, meaning he's got that ace build and presence already. Looks like a body that could develop a fastball, but we'll see.
Yeah, when I first watched him pitch, I thought he reminded me a little bit of Michael Pineda.
There you go. Ace,
but just a huge dude. So Joe, I asked you again before we started taping if you had Tommy John. I guess I'm just a skeptic like that. The answer is no. So the inconsistency with the velocity that you've both mentioned, are there any health concerns that you've heard of or that you're aware of going into this draft pick?
I'm not aware of any yet, but certainly inconsistencies with velocity could be injury related, or it could be workload related, because he did work a lot at Vanderbilt. And this is a true like team first kind of guy. He'll take the ball at any time. He'll take it on short rest. Didn't care. He literally wanted to do whatever he could to help Vanderbilt win. And I think his workload caught up to him, to be totally honest. And a lot of players too had kind of weird years with no college baseball in 2020 because of COVID. They basically didn't throw, so they had nothing, and then they had to come back and pitch like normal. So I think you did see I think across college baseball, you saw some inconsistent velocities, and Rocker was obviously a guy that was affected by it. Jack Leiter was too. I mean, I saw Jack Leiter starts where he was 89 to 92. So I think a lot of people were impacted. Maybe a combination of missing a full year and in combination with his workload. Hopefully there's not some injury underneath, but I have not heard if there is.
No, yeah, same. I mean, I'm not super like day to day. My job isn't to talk to amateur scouts about that kind of gossip, but I have talked to a lot of people about Rocker, and it's more like head scratcher than, by the way, there's
a shoulder thing.
That's not what you hear. You hear more like, I don't know, it's weird. Like I just read you. Some days he's an ace, right. Some days he's not at all.
Yeah.
So Andy, other than, lathering up the spider tack, because that's what we're talking about with spin rate every day at the big league level. So Kumar Rocker gets to Port St. Lucie, as Joe says, analytical department, new scouting and evaluators. How is he supposed to, let's say he's sitting 95. How is he supposed to increase the spin rate of that pitch? Like, how will they tell him to do that?
Well, steroids would be good as far as having a better fastball. Spider tack would work. That would be, they'd love it if he's sitting 95. He's been touching 95, sitting low 90s. That's the problem.
Well, I guess a fastball in my head, I'm like, it just either it goes as fast as it goes.
Well, there's a lot of stuff, these labs that like workouts with weighted balls. Like the uptick in velocity in the game has a lot to do, I think, with the way that they're working out at places like Driveline and all of its children now in the game, and these private businesses. People have now been hired into organizations. There are and I'm not an expert on the exact methods. I know weighted balls is one of them, but there are ways in which velocity is now trained, other than the old ways, which were steroids and spider tack.
Joe, I want to move on to a couple guys. Brett Baty, who just got the call up to Binghamton, and Francisco Alvarez. Let's start with Baty. How high's the ceiling on this kid for any Met fan listening?
So I actually comped him to Kyle Seager of the Mariners. And to me, I thought I was being complimentary, but on Twitter, they thought I was.
Oh, you can't say anything other than Mike Schmidt, though.
Right.
It's just Kyle Seager's such a good career that he would sign up for 10 times out of 10. He's made a great living. So I
what
think
an
that's
indictment of Mets Twitter that is. If they thought that was a bad thing. Go on.
With Baty, you're talking about, a plus bat to all fields, good pitch recognition skills at the plate, kind of the prototypical Mets prospect. These are the kind of guys they like. Power and on-base skills, and will teach contact as you go. And he's a 25 to 30 home run potential bat. And defensively, I think he's really made strides at third base. Coming into the year, I had a lot of scouts telling me he's probably a first baseman long-term, but he worked really hard. And I think there is actually a chance he sticks at third. He may never win a Gold Glove for you, but I don't think he's going to be booting every ball or throwing them, into the stands. But he does have a strong arm. I mean, he pitched in high school. He was up to 93 or 94 on the gun in high school. So he's got the arm to play third base. It's just the lateral quickness and just the soft hands. So to me, big Baty fan. And if he ends up having a Kyle Seager career, like you said, Doug, that's pretty damn good.
Yeah.
I'll never forget that the Mets' first announcement of his draft pick was included a typo that was quickly resent, but they called him Mets draft Brett Baby. And so I always think of him as Brett Baby.
Well, he's kind of a baby. He's a young kid.
Not a baby. He's a relative babe in the baseball world. I heard something from him on him that was cool, a little detail. A scout that saw him in Brooklyn a month or two ago. It was just like every Mets hitter, which is normal for that level, including Francisco Alvarez, jumping with that front foot a little at the breaking ball and just not quite having the pitch recognition yet, which is where they're supposed to be in player development. But Baty's so mature as a hitter that he's laying back, not jumping with the front foot and being ready for that off-speed pitch, which is pretty rare at that level in Brooklyn.
And not only that, I saw in person one, and then a couple home runs he hit to left field on breaking balls where, exactly what you said, he stayed back and he took the breaking ball the other way with authority. So this is a real power bat, no question.
So speaking of power bats, as Andy mentioned, Francisco Alvarez, he hit a homer in the Futures game, Joe. What's the comp for him? What comp do you give him that is actually a compliment that Mets Twitter says, no, come on, he's going to be, Yadier Molina?
I mean, that's what Jeremy Barnes said. Can I just copy him? And when he said it, and I was just like, ooh, man. Okay.
It's not nice of him to do that to a young player.
I was like, you're new here, I guess. But as far as a comp, it's really tough. I mean, he's a bigger guy. I think he's hopefully max filled out. Hopefully there's not too much filling out to do. Otherwise he might not really be able to stick behind the plate. But his actions there are good. The Mets certainly want to see him grow receiving and pitch framing. He's got a pretty good pop times on his throw, above average arm. So he's going to be able to stick behind the plate, I think. But obviously his money's in his bat. I mean, this is a very unique bat outside of not even just being a catcher. It's a unique bat for a catcher. It'd be a unique bat at almost any position. This is really good contact. I mean, he hits missiles all the time. Exit velocities, barrel rate, it's the best in the organization. Does it to all fields. He showed the pull power yesterday, able to pull that out at Coors Field. That was really cool to see. But I rank him number one in the system. And the reason I did that is if you had to tell me there is a prospect in the Mets system that's going to make all-star games, the answer is Francisco Alvarez. So that's why I rank him number one. Truly a unique prospect that I think when you start reading top 100 lists in the offseason and next spring, he's going to be comfortably inside the top 20, if not the top 10 for most of these other sites.
By the way, Jeremy Barnes is the Mets director of player development. I just wanted to get that.
Director of hyperbole.
Wait, so Barnes, I must have missed this. Barnes said like he's Yadier Molina.
Loosely, and he was on the first episode of Mets Perspective, and he's like, I don't really want to say this, but his swing and stuff is kind of like Yadier Molina at the same stage. And I'm
Not
like,
supposed to do that. You know what? The Yankees
good for Joe. Good for Joe on his show to get that out there.
No, good for you.
Fantastic.
Yes. You got the bite, but my gosh. What I was going to say was the Yankees front office literally still talks about the disservice that Jason Giambi did to Phil Hughes. He saw him throw one live BP in spring training a decade and a half ago and said, that's a baby rocket. It reminds me of Clemens. So for the rest of a good career, he was not Roger Clemens.
And not to make it a Yankee show, but Jason Dominguez.
There's another one.
Yeah, another one.
See the next Zeus or something. What are they laying on him?
So the latest that I saw and read somewhere was he was a cross between Mike Trout and Mickey Mantle.
Jeez, come on.
Like by somebody you respect was saying that?
By like a mainstream like MLB pipeline, I think, or something. And I was just like,
terrible. You can't do that to people.
Yeah, this poor kid. And by the way, at that point in time, he never even had a professional at bat at all. He did nothing.
That's not fair.
Yeah. It's not fair. So Mets fans have been watching Tyler McGill. He was earlier in the season, kind of a sleeper prospect that you put out there, Joe, and he's been really impressive. Is there somebody else that you think Mets fans should have their eye on at this stage?
I'm going to go with Mark Vientos. He's kind of coming on the scene a little more now, but he's a guy that his power has been unreal. I mean, he has 14 home runs now in Double-A. And they pushed him to Double-A at a young age. They basically had to decide between him and Brett Baty. They're both third basemen. Who's going to start in Double-A and who's going to start in High A? Because they're both third basemen, can only really have one. So they decided to push Vientos because he had more professional experience. In May, he was really, really rough, struggled against Double-A pitching. Then in June, he picked up in a big way. He OPS'd over 1. Hit 9 home runs, including like 5 games in a row. Just a truly unique bat, I think. Just positionally, he's the one that I have a question where he's going to play long-term. Mm-hmm. I don't think he's a third baseman. The Mets are playing around in left field a little bit. And I mean, I don't know if that's necessarily going to work. So I wonder if he's a first baseman long-term. And I think that can lead to some conversation if Vientos might be one of the top trade chips come trade deadline time, because where does he positionally fit long-term with the Mets?
Andy, I want to get your take on this and then Joe's, and then we'll let Joe go. But where do you think right now, given the interesting state of things, the Brody regime lasted a couple of years, there was some good and some bad. Now we have Zach Scott, Sandy Alderson. Big picture, where do you think the Mets farm system stands?
I'll be as diplomatic as Terry Collins was on BNNY when you asked him to define Lindor's season, and he said improving.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess they're getting it. Obviously, Brody's stated goal was win now, parentheses, win in the future. My parentheses are mine, not his. Yeah. But it was what it was. I think history is still going to judge that Seattle trade that Brody made. It's TBD in some ways. It might not. My point is, it might not look as bad as it looked for a while. The trade for Castro last year still might be good. Giving up starting pitcher for him, giving up Anthony Kay doesn't seem like a very big deal yet, and keeping Peterson. So their internal evaluations in some ways were okay, but they did trade a good amount of minor league players. And Alderson's stated goal is not to beef up amateur scouting so much. Like the guys like Tommy Tanis and his group are just in place with more authority under Sandy, but beefing up player development and probably keeping players that Brody might have traded. So we'll see. They also, in fairness to Brody though, Sandy can say that, but they traded 2 shortstops with like more than a decade of control between them to get Lindor, who only had 1 year of control. And obviously Carrasco too, when you could have just signed Lindor. So that was a very Brody type move in a way. So we'll see how it all plays out.
Joe, what do you think?
From my perspective, I think it's a very top heavy system. I mean, the top prospects in the system, in my opinion, really could play with almost any team in baseball. Like if you're just talking the top 5 for the Mets versus the top 5 for most teams in baseball, they're right there with them, neck and neck. The problem is once you get past like 7 or so, it takes a steep drop down. Part to Andy's point, as he mentioned, the trades that were made. So they just traded a lot of prospects. You obviously can debate what those guys will be in the future, but they traded a bunch of guys. So they really need to rebuild the depth of the system. And I think that's when you'll see them kind of climb up those rankings, MLB Pipeline, all the sites that do it, as far as organizationally, but really top heavy, really impactful type prospects. Part of that is some credit due to Brody as well. I mean, he really wanted to push the plan to draft Matt Allen. He really wanted to push the plan to draft JT Ginn, and they foregoed depth in the draft by going with college senior signs to be able to have the money to pay for impact. They basically said, all right, we'll get 2 to 3 hopefully impactful players, and the rest will be what they are. And yeah, I think it's an improving system, as Andy really started with. It is improving, but it's certainly needs more depth. And I think that's what the next 2 days of the draft are going to be geared towards, improving that depth, in the teens and 20s, and that as far as prospect rankings in the system goes.
You can follow Joe at PSL to Flushing on Twitter, and check out an all-new episode of Mets Perspective. It's presented by Verizon this Thursday, which will feature an exclusive interview with Kumar Rocker, a full wrap of the draft. And I hear from Joe that Kumar Rocker gave a long and nuanced answer when asked about who his biggest inspiration was in his career.
You won't want to miss that answer. It was very enlightening.
Yeah, very enlightening. Joe, thank you so much. This has been a pleasure of ours, and we appreciate it. And hopefully we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Joe. Good stuff.
We'll talk to you guys soon.
Once again, you're listening to the Shea Anything podcast. It's brought to you by Verizon. It's 5G built right for the Mets from the network more people rely on, only on Verizon. All right, let's do a 3-batter rule. Andy had some breaking news this morning about some front office promotions. Andy, take us through what they are and what they might mean.
Well, the biggest ones there were a number, and I don't have all of them. There were like many promotions that happened internally with the Mets, but the headline ones were Brent Alderson and Ian Levin to assistant GM. That's a significant job in any front office, of course. And one thing that did not happen, which is also significant, is Zach Scott did not get his acting GM title removed. He was not promoted at this time to permanent GM. So take you through that a little bit. Brent Alderson's, who is Sandy's son, been in the organization for now just about 10 years, started as a pro scout, lasted through the Brody years and became influential actually during the Brody years. And his department, that promotion comes in part from the fact that his pro scouting department that he oversaw is as much responsible for the Mets' success this year as any other piece of that organization, because we talk about the players who took over when everyone was hurt. All of those guys were the depth signings that were results of the pro scouting department. In particular, I want to just open this up because I think these guys don't get a lot of publicity and deserve some. Jason Stein, David Keller, Joseph Kowal, and Connor Brooks were some of the guys working under Brent that really did great work in finding your Alvarez and your VRs and your McKinneys and all these kinds of things for Zach Scott and for Brent Alderson. Ian Levin's a guy who actually not a name that's necessarily known to a lot of Mets fans, but it's been there way back since 2005, the beginning of the Omar Minaya regime, if you can believe it. Relatively young guy, but he started as a media relations intern, moved over to baseball ops. He's done some work with John Ricco on like the rules and technical side. He's done player development. He's been all over, and him and Brent Alderson have assumed greater responsibility this year, traveling with the team, being in the clubhouse, working with Luis Rojas on game strategy. So they were officially elevated to assistant GM, and that's a pretty big deal for the Mets. And a tip of the cap from Sandy Alderson and Steve Cohen, who had to approve these, that some people deserve some title and pay raises for their good work in the first half.
But not Zach Scott. And that was something that, would you put it that it was a minor, you kind of editorialized last week that you thought that he was doing really good work. Yeah. And you think he deserves it.
Others do as well. If I'm writing I'm talking to people. Why is a good question. I think it's more like a what's the rush? What might be the counter response? Let's see how the year ends. It's hard to argue against
trade deadline.
The people who work with Zach Scott closely are like, yeah, of course he should be the GM. He deserves it. But these are Steve Cohen's calls, and that call wasn't made yet. So that's where we are. Guess we'll see at the end of the year.
Okay. So let's do a trade deadline question of the 3 battle rule, and then kind of a looking back at the first half question for you. If you were a combo of Steve Cohen, you've made the point before that it might happen at 3:55 on July 31st. He's like, trade them all, get everyone, whatever. Mm-hmm. You're a combo of Steve Cohen and Zach Scott and Sandy Alderson. What do you think the Mets should do to build on this first place team at the deadline?
Oh, a little bit of offense. I don't know if Josh Donaldson would be my guy because of the injury stuff. That is always a risk there. But there aren't that many choices. Like the Mariners are in
like, would you get Chris Bryant?
Yeah. Yes, I would. Yes, that's the guy. There you go.
Yeah. I mean, it's like
Bryant and Kimbrel. Kimbrel's going to cost you too many prospects. But, boy, the Mets got Bryant and Kimbrel. They're the favorites to win the World Series, I think.
Jim Duquette did a mock trade on Friday for Bryant, and it was shockingly little. But again, it's a rental.
It's not going to take much for Bryant.
Yeah. And I'm always so shocked to see somebody with that big of a name not cost much. It was Drew Smith and then one other prospect. And I forget who he said. I'm not sure if we got to it on the show, but we asked him, what a Kimbrel and Bryant would cost. And I think it's somebody like Vientos, Drew Smith, one more prospect. So
Kimbrel,
potentially
do that. Jeez.
Yeah. I mean, potentially a lot, but adding to your making your bullpen that deep, it works. I mean, I don't know. I could see them trying to do that.
Lugo to May to Kimbrel to Diaz. Yes, please. If I'm
and Familia and Castro and Loop.
Okay, that sounds good.
Yeah.
Do that.
Do that. Looking back at the first half, I'm actually Jeff put this in the rundown. I like the question. I'm not even sure what he meant by it. Like, Jeff, did you mean favorite storyline, or did you mean the favorite story that Andy wrote?
Oh, there's so many to choose from on the ladder. My goodness.
Storyline.
Oh, he wasn't playing to Andy's,
ego
columns and the ego. And well, you know what, Andy? Because Jeff's muted and it's not his choice anymore. Give us your favorite Mets storyline and your favorite story that you wrote about the Mets.
Well, then it really troubles me about stories that I write is that I forget them. Sometimes I work really hard on them and then I have to look back. Oh, what have I written on such and such? And I'm like, that wasn't bad, that little scoop. And no one cared and I forgot about it. And what's the point of any of this? So I don't know if I'll be able to come
you always come back to death too, which I think, your system in your brain auto deletes so easily because you always come back to the fact that we're all eventually going to die.
Well, so I don't know. It's an interesting existential question. When I'm dead, no one will care that I reported about Ian Levin and Brent Alderson, but perhaps being alive means disregarding that and giving your all to the task at hand every day, which I've done. By breaking that little news.
Okay, I'm really sorry for having brought this up, everybody. Andy, what was your favorite Mets storyline of the first half?
Favorite Mets storyline? I don't know. Finishing
most interesting.
I don't know. Ask a Mets fan. I don't have one. I don't know. I just cover the games.
How about DeGrom?
Yeah, I'm not gonna get into.
How about Diaz? Have you found that story interesting? His progression or lack thereof?
No, I mean it's all interesting. I just don't know. Like nothing jumps out. The rat raccoon thing probably, and that was really bad. That's what's in my head.
I'm so interested to see what is usable since this question and answer.
You better use all of it because I'm authentic here and I'm meaning everything I say. I hope you don't cut any of this. I don't listen to this podcast, so I'll never know. But no, every once in a while I listen to it to see how I'm doing. And I realized I haven't.
Would it kill you to listen when you're not on, or watch Baseball Night in New York when you're not on?
I'm working. What do you want me to preen over things I've already done, or do you want me to work?
No, I want you to watch it when you're not on, because maybe you're a fan of my work.
I listen. I'll tell you. Well, I am, as you know, I'm a fan of your work, which is why I enjoy appearing with you. But I do listen to this sometimes because I'm well aware, actually, in my marriage and in this podcast, that I'm an interrupter. And when I go overboard with it, listening to it helps go, geez, would you shut up? So it helps me pull that in sometimes. So I do listen for that sometimes. My favorite story that I wrote, I don't remember, but there was a nice one about what was the one truly that day I covered a Mets game from the Lower East Side of Manhattan. I thought I landed on a creative way to write about the team from a distance that I was kind of proud of after not having a lot of access for the past year. So that was one. It's like breaking news. I don't know. You like breaking stories is great, but
no, I didn't. I was not expecting you to be like, oh, I remember when I broke that story. I was expecting you to bring something like that column up. But can you just clarify for our audience? So you covered it. You covered a game from the Lower East Side, or you covered it at Citi Field and from the perspective of being in the Lower East Side?
I spent a day in Tompkins Square Park, a couple of pubs and restaurants around it, up in Penn Station later. And I wrote about how there was a certain energy in the city that I'd never seen before, and how I'm seeing the Mets game on TV. It's kind of in the backdrop of a lot of the other cultural things that I'm seeing. And I saw people, I happened to be in Penn Station at the right time when like a lot of the Mets fans from the game clearly were there. And like you saw a lot of the jerseys mingling with the kids who were coming in to hang out. And I was just like, it gave me a broader perspective on what the Mets might achieve this year, being an exciting team at an extremely exciting and unique time in New York City I want to say post-pandemic, but when things are opening back up.
Right.
And rather than, I get so much pleasure out of, like, when I go to a game, I chart every pitch and I try to come up with like a very hyper-focused game topic or question to think about, like DeGrom's playing around with the velocity on his fastball or something. So to zoom out all the way to another borough and feel like I could write something relevant about the Mets felt like a creative spin that I was pleased with.
Yeah. And, it's interesting. We had the ticker tape parade to, celebrate the medical workers in the city. And it does feel, we've been describing living in New York to people who are like, what was it like here? And it's kind of a collective awareness of what this place went through. I mean, I was I spent a lot of time in Connecticut and New Jersey in the peak of COVID. But I came back in July of last year to go back to work. And, this place has gone through something together. And I think, to your point, if you're, just to bring back the second of the three batter rules, if you're Zach Scott, Sandy Alderson, Steve Cohen, I think you realize, it's happening in progressively and kind of slowly, but I think you realize what New York was going through a little over a year ago and what we still have to gain from being together and going through something together that's happier than a pandemic. So, it's crazy to have just finished an episode of this podcast and not discussed the meltdown the Mets had against the Pirates on Sunday, the day before the All-Star break. Yeah,
they deserve that not being discussed. They're a good team, and it's a one loss. Big deal.
Yeah, bad loss, but
honestly, like.
But think about it. I'm sad for Ronald Acuna and Braves fans, but that's a blow to them. The Phillies are a mess. The Nats are, I don't think they're a legitimate competitor. Maybe they're the one team that could compete. Mets fans, life's good. Like, you're in first place. Enjoy the All-Star break. Realize that
it's when an angst. The angst is always
and I understand the angst, because the angst comes from, Keith said on the last episode of this podcast that, like, it's been 35 years since they won. So it's time. I get the angst, but enjoy it. You have a good team.
Yeah.
And imagine if you get Brian and Kimbrel.
You want a bad loss. Just Google what happened in Houston yesterday at the same time. Now that's lost.
But by the way, there was, just a lot this weekend because Italy won the Euro right when Altuve hit the walk-off.
Really? It was simultaneous, basically?
It was really right when that was happening.
I didn't know that.
Twitter
I was just watching
totally divided. There was a lot of one-word tweets. I think Rich Eisen tweeted, "Oh no," and I was like, "Well, was he rooting for England or was he watching the Yankees?" And a year before, an hour before that, maybe was the Wilmer Defoe hit that finally drove in that run, and the Pirates took the lead. Crazy. I also, just a quick, my Saturday night, I was on the Henry Hudson Parkway yesterday, early West Side Highway, in the Harlem area, but not yet at the GW.
Right.
And I was behind such a serious accident that I was stopped for almost an hour, I walked my dog, that type of thing. And I was listening to the Met game and talking to other people in cars in New York. It was a crazy New York experience, a wild day of baseball and traffic and just your usual Sunday.
New York City can give you a day like no other place where all kinds of weird shit happens.
It can grind your life to a halt when you're so used to moving quickly at New York's pace. All right, everybody. Thank you for listening. Sorry, this got kind of deep at the end.
Why would you be sorry for that?
I knew you were going to say
conversation.
that. I knew you were going to say that.
A weird thing to be sorry for.
We'll be talking to you later this week with Jerry Blevins. I have some homework to do. I have to watch Whiplash, which I'm actually very excited to watch. Have you seen that, Andy?
No, Ruby won't watch it. I want to. That's one of those ones we can't agree on.
I'm going to watch it at some point. Jeff, did I get that right? Because we have a special edition of the podcast coming up, which is also this week. But we also have Jerry coming up this week with that special guest. Yes.
Okay.
All right. You'll have to stay tuned and listen. It's going to be exciting. Thanks for listening, everybody. Talk to you later.